In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be with you all again. And I'm feeling so much better than I was last week. Finally over my cold or viral infection or whatever it was. And so I appreciate so much to be able to be with everybody tonight. And tonight is our Wise Older Women panel. And you know these ladies, Jill and Judy and Dana. And I just appreciate so much y'all being with me tonight as well. And we have a program tonight. We're going to talk about a mother's advice to her son. It's interesting to me that Proverbs 31, I was telling the ladies, I've always looked at it so much from a man's standpoint, but it's really a mother's advice to her son. And so, we're going to look at it from that viewpoint as well. Jill, some introductory remarks. I put you on the spot. I didn't tell you I was going to do that. So.
Well, as I started rereading this afternoon, I was reading the first verse, and it made me think of the form of Jewish poetry that they often use, which is to repeat something 3 times, and each time say it a little more strongly or with a slightly different flavor. So, let's just read verse 1, and then the words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. Verse 2. What, my son, and what son of my womb, and what son of my vows? Each gets a little stronger, but it states the importance of the relationship between a caring mother and her son.
Mm-hmm. I in looking at it in the ESV, it amuses me. She says, "What are you doing?" That was an interesting way to look at it. And I thought that is so much. I've said that to my son. What are you doing? So.
And I used to always say, "What are you thinking?" or "What were you thinking?"
Yeah.
That's what that makes. I use the ESV all the time, and that's what that makes me think about. I love the way the NIV says it. It says, "Listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb," and then it says, "Listen, my son. Answer to my prayers." I don't know why they translated it that way, although often I know the NIV takes great care in how they translate it. But I did think that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Hannah and maybe Rachel too, the women who were without progeny for so long and how much they longed to have a son.
Right.
That's what I was thinking that too. In that, like Hannah, maybe she was barren also and prayed for a son, and so then she was going to dedicate. So the vow part of that statement, maybe, might be that. But it really to me showed her inward emotion of her heart, like how her son, and I'm right there with her because I got one of those sons. And like that, you would say something like, "What are you thinking? What are you doing?" So
Oh yeah.
And now we have to think of her position. We know that he's King Lemuel, so at least he will be a king.
Yeah.
And so there's a big responsibility there, and her position was really because of him. Because she had a male offspring.
Mm.
follow
Okay.
the king's line of power and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hey, you know, I have two sons and a daughter, and when I read these, I always think, well, you know, this would apply to the daughter, but in many ways, and especially when we get into where we talk about the loose women and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a whole nother world raising boys than it is
Mhm.
raising a daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they don't both have their complications. My most difficult child in my mind, said one's mind, I would never want a daughter. They're so hard to raise. My daughter had to be my easiest. What are you thinking?
Naturally.
Right. Well, I was, when I was looking at this also, I was thinking, it's the mother talking to the son, giving advice. And I'm thinking, this is applicable both to the women as well as to the son, to the daughter as well as the son. This and today also,
Yes.
this is very applicable.
Right.
Well, this, and I'm glad you said that, because we don't want somebody to tune in and say, "Oh, well, that's for boys. It's not
Yeah.
for me. I don't have any boys," or and so forth. The advice is right there perfectly for each of us, whether we're a mother or a grandmother, whether we have children or not, whether it fits all of that. And we looked at the next verses. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry, I didn't want to rush you along.
just real quick. My New King James says the utterance which his mother taught him, but the ESV says an oracle that his mother taught him. So that would be, to me, reinforce the idea that this is some learning that she was going to have him practice, memorize.
Yeah. Right.
Not
As though she hadn't just, as though it's like, one time I'm going to tell you this and then that's it. It was over and over, so that he would get it. So,
Well, before we go on, one more thing. Jill made the point. This reminds you of the poetry that they did, where they repeated, and the repetition was for emphasis. And I think these opening verses just let us know, get your attention. What's fixing to be said is extremely important. And I think it just builds as it goes in its importance. Yeah.
Dana, let's look at verse 3. Can you read that one for us? Do you have it handy to read?
Yes. Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. Now I'm using the ESV. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought of Proverbs. The Proverbs talk so much about that, but Proverbs 5, 6, and 7 all deal with the adulterous woman, the loose woman, the difficulties. In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5, it says, "My son, be attentive to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge." And I love that, keep discretion, because that's what it's all about, is using good judgment when you're to a son, when you're looking for a woman, or you're looking out your window, as it talks about in one of those chapters, and you see the attractiveness that so easily tempts you, and what are you thinking?
Well, yeah, that's the whole point. What are they thinking? And that's exactly right. They are thinking. They that Hebrew word there, the one we just read it, Proverbs 30, whatever. Okay, it means vigor. It means that's 30. Yeah, I lost my spot. Hold on one second. Here it is, 31. Okay, so your strength to women. Do not give your strength. It's translated vigor, and that's exactly what it is. And we need to recognize that men and women are different.
Right.
And so this is something that's very, and this scripture, Dana referred to the different places in Proverbs, but the one that always gets me is 6:26. For by means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread. I just think that just really says it, it just brings him down to nothing. It goes nowhere. There's nothing good that comes from that. It's almost like the next thing we're going to talk about, but it brings them down low, and it messes, it just messes them up big time. And he needs to really use the discretion.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at those 3 chapters, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they just don't mince any words, and they really lay it out. And we need to teach our sons, this is the reality of bad choices. And I mean, that's going to be very much in contrast to the verses starting verse 10 through the end of the chapter.
Right.
And that's what we always emphasize, but we need to warn and prevent as well.
Yes, I agree. Need to back up to all those other verses.
Right. And how, I think mothers, of course, are teaching their children, fathers are teaching their children. How can we as sisters, if we have brothers, or if we're in a congregation, we have physical brothers or we have spiritual brothers, how can we help them if they get, you see a situation developing? I mean, doesn't that happen sometimes? You see something starting?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have to, we're told if someone sinned against us, we're to go to them. And if we love someone, we're going to go and gently, with love, talk to them. And as older women, as older sisters in the congregation, hopefully you have some influence over young people. And if you do, if you don't, it's difficult. But they're just, it doesn't have to even just be your physical brothers and sisters. It like you say, even young men. And there's a young man and his wife, they just got married, that I'm studying with, and they're not Christians yet, but he adores me. Well, then I need to use that influence. And he does it. His mother is not living. His father's not living. He has a sister that's very worldly. And, then I need to take advantage of that situation and, use the influence I have and be a mother to him as much as I can be.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah, that can be really time consuming for you, but so valuable for him, for his wife, for the kingdom. If we're, as you say, they're not Christians yet, but you're working with them, and we have an influence, where we have something, perhaps just to make an observation. Have you noticed how she does, of a woman that isn't the kind of woman that she should be, and to try to keep, just like King Lemuel's mother was trying to keep him away from this kind of woman. Perhaps we can use our influence to be able to as well. Jill?
Well, I think we're going to see as we go on through the chapter here that the best way to do that sometimes is to show an example of what a really good relationship looks like, what the benefits are of having someone who's mutually invested in your future and your well-being. So it may not be direct teaching, or it may just be giving a good example and being ready to give advice if asked.
Very good point. Very good.
I think there's another issue here, not issue, but there's another point to be made here, and that is if we're going to have that kind of a relationship, especially within the church, if there's young people that, we have got to develop that relationship. If we don't develop it, and you're not going to approach someone because they are not going to be approachable if you don't have that relationship. So,
I just the book I just wrote, which has just come out and it's called Stirring Silent Generations, and it's on being Titus 2 woman. But the whole point is, and the opening chapter is on the fact that we have often been silent, both older generations and younger. And I make the point, we haven't been teaching. They might not have been learning, but we haven't been teaching. And if we haven't been teaching, whose fault is that? And it requires, like you said, we have to be involved in young people's lives, and that's difficult. That can be time consuming. That takes a lot of thought and a lot of prayer. And my children don't live near me.
Right.
So does that mean I have no obligation anymore? And I mean, certainly I have obligations to them and so on and so forth, but there are people and young people that live near me, and I need to make certain I'm doing everything I can in their lives. And I don't care who you are, you're older than somebody, and you need to be influencing them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a family here who they don't have a godly influence for their children close by.
Yeah.
And sometimes both physically close by and then spiritually they're not. And more than once, the parents have said, "You all are the ones who our kids look up to. You've been there for them, and you've done in terms of the congregation." And it's just so gratifying to understand. And like you said, Dana, that our kids don't live close, but here are our children who can benefit from our godly example and our interaction with them. And as Judy said, we can't expect to just all of a sudden say, "Well, let me give you some advice," when we haven't built up a relationship over the years. And it takes more than just seeing somebody once a week in Bible class. I mean, it just takes some time so that we can have that kind of influence, just like a mother does over a child.
Yeah.
It takes effort.
Yes.
Absolutely. Amen, sisters. Amen.
That's right.
Y'all read my book.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. I don't have my copy.
It sounds like you already read it. We all could have written it. That's the point. And I think that's the thing. We just, we never lived near our parents with our children, and they have lots of grandparents. And lots of aunts and uncles that had influence on them. And thank goodness that, they had those people. Yeah. And that's what we need to do. Yeah.
And I think too, sometimes we in the church, we don't appreciate what kind of influence we have over younger people, and how they look at whether we're in attendance, whether we're interacting with others, whether we interact with them. Are we studying? Do we have our Bible open? Do we, just all of those things that we may not think that anybody's even noticing. And yet those younger children are really looking to see what we're doing. And your kids are definitely an example of that, looking around at others in the congregations where you've been. Yeah. The next passage we'll look at is verses 4-7, reading from the ESV. "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. And verses 4-7, I just sort of condensed it here. It is not for kings to drink wine or strong drink, lest they forget decrees or the rules, the laws that have been made, and pervert the rights of the afflicted. Anybody want to speak up on this one?
Well, it affects judgment.
Yes.
I mean, there's no two ways about it. It affects judgment. And so why would you want a king who's drinking and strong drink, and his judgment's going to be off? He's not going to make the right judgments. And so it definitely affects judgment. And it is very sad to see someone who has imbibed to the point where they have nothing in their brain anymore. You know, it's really, it's sad.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my 2 cents. It affects judgment. Your mind's not clear. You're not thinking right. And I'll tell you what else happens. You'll do things that you never would have done if you were sober. That's one of the things that it does do. Yeah.
That's right. Dana?
Well, I was going to say again in Proverbs, if you give me just a moment, let me read Proverbs 23 verses 29-35, because I think it just sums all of what you just said. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea. And I mean, how foolish can that be? Or one who lies at the top of a mast saying, they struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I didn't feel it. When shall I wake that I may seek another drink?
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of sums up what Judy said.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it surely does.
Absolutely.
Jill, any thoughts here for us?
Well, just kind of as far as the drinking, I think just like you're saying, it's self-explanatory in relation to that topic, but also it kind of really points out, you know, a king, someone who has responsibilities, has to always be sober-minded, has to always be ready to make decisions that are right and helpful to others.
And as a parent, we would all have that responsibility. And I would say as spouses, we have the responsibility to our spouse. And we go on and on.
Yeah, it goes on.
You know, in a broad sense, your life is not really your own to fritter away whatever gives you pleasure.
Yeah.
Because we all have responsibilities.
Absolutely.
I think about 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 that says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And in order to resist the devil, and as it says in verse 9, being firm in your faith, in order to do that, you have to be sober-minded. You have to absolutely have every brain cell you have, on the alert. And I always think too of that alcohol is a poison. That's why people throw up when they drink too much. That's what it's trying. Your body's flushing it out because it's a poison. There's just no way it's good for you. Another quote I read once that really made sense. It says, you take a drink, and then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes you. People will say, well, the Bible talks about drunkenness and talks against drunkenness, but once you take a drink, you're on your way. You're not sober. You're not 100%. So I just think that it's, for me, the choice I've made in my life is never to use alcohol. And I'm so old now, I see no point in starting. I tell people. Jill?
So then what is the purpose of alcohol? And I think it tells us there, someone who's in intense pain, and they didn't have the medications that we have now.
Right.
He might need a strong drink to put him out of
Mhm.
being misery, to allow him to rest from that, his body
Yeah.
to heal.
Yeah.
So there can be a purpose for things, but
Right.
Just like opiates or pain relieving medicines, we shouldn't take them just in general, just so that we can be in la la land. But they're right and appropriate for someone who is in intense pain, who's
Right.
dying. So,
and we see problems with that in our time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I again, in this book I wrote, because it's on Titus 2, and it talks about the older woman not being given to much wine. So I deal a chapter on alcoholism, and there are 2 books in there that I recommend that talk about the alcohol. I mean, let me rephrase that: the strong drink versus wine in the Bible, and there is good material out there. If the Bible never talks about intoxicating drink in a positive way.
right.
This would be the closest it
Mhm.
ever does.
Yeah.
Pain reliever. But it never talks about it in a positive way.
Mhm. I think that's a really important point, that if we can, remember that if the Bible doesn't speak of something positively, why do we want it in our lives? So, absolutely. Well, Jill, I'm sorry, Judy. It was a J.
Somebody. So one of the scriptures that I think about is to abstain from every form of evil. Okay. And certainly in my lifetime, I have seen much evil come from alcohol.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that's one of the scriptures that I try to lean on with regards to that. However, I will say that the Bible does condemn drunkenness, and we each have to decide for ourselves
Yes.
which avenue we're going to take. There, as Ila said, she just stay away from it, and then you'll never become an alcoholic if you don't ever touch the first drink. There are people who can drink one drink and not become an alcoholic. I mean, I just don't want to get away from what the scripture teaches.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does teach
I agree.
drunkenness is a sin.
Right. I think so. And I set up a buffer law for myself. I just don't touch it.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And that may not be, like you said, there's some people that can drink a wine now and again and it not affect them.
Right.
But that's, for me, I said, I don't,
Right.
let it go. So, but good point. Thank you. Absolutely. The next verses here, verses 8 and 9, King Lemuel's mother tells him, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." What is she advising him to do? I mean, what's kind of the gist or the point of this advice that she's giving him?
Speak for those who can't.
Mm-hmm.
Care for the unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah.
be selfless.
Mm-hmm. That's
Selfless.
good. Yeah. Yeah.
Matthew 11, 4-5, it says Jesus answered them, and this is when John's disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, had sent them to Jesus because John was in prison. And, "Are you the one we're looking for?" And Jesus said, "Go tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. All of those categories are people in need, and they needed Jesus who could help them in a way that we can't, but we can help all those people to one degree or another. And Jesus never backed away from association with those whom society saw as unimportant.
Mm.
And that's what we're called to do. I think about Dorcas and how she, you know, we never hear about her teaching a class or any great thing, but she loved to sew. Yeah. And she sewed for other people. And yet we're told many believed because of what she had done. Mm-hmm. What a powerful lesson, just serving others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Serving others. That's really what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then what's the next piece of advice that King Lemuel's mother gives him? When we go into verse 10, what's she telling him 10 through, I think I said 29, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Find a virtuous wife.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at this as a woman's advice to her son, it makes, I don't know, just kind of different perspective on all of these traits of a woman, rather than, I've always thought of it, you know, as Solomon writing this, or Proverbs of a person, you know, of a man. But when I look at him as a woman saying these things, it's just, I don't know, it has a different feeling for me. I think it's because this is a woman who is telling her son, this is the kind of woman that you need to look for. Did y'all find that as you were looking at it from this perspective?
Yeah.
What do you think, Danny?
Well, you know, later I'm looking through my notes here, but later you ask a point or make a point about how was she, this mother, qualified to say these things, to make these comments to him, to make this advice to him. And I think one of the ways this very much to me shows she is qualified, because she knows what it means to be the kind of woman that is going to help him, et cetera, et cetera. And I think about how it's interesting to me that if you go back to chapter 1 of Proverbs, and it's verse 7, I believe, it starts off that, of course I can't flip over there.
Yeah, can't go that fast.
I know it's there, but I keep going back and forth. The fear of the Lord's the beginning of knowledge. And then verse 30, I know I'm jumping ahead. Okay. Charm's deceitful and beauty's vain, but a woman who fears the Lord. So the book begins with the fear of the Lord and ends with the fear of the Lord. And how did this mother, how was she qualified to do that? Because she understood that. Mm-hmm. And I think of the passage that talks about your fruits, you will know them. Well, if she's a mother, and she's a mother of an adult man, she's lived long enough, as we have, to see the fruits of what kind of women do I want my son to marry.
Right.
And even if she wasn't that woman herself, which I figure she probably was, but even if she wasn't, she learned from her mistakes, and she's lived long enough to know this is what you need to be looking for. And by their fruits you shall know them. And she could see that. Mm-hmm. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to me that this is probably his mother telling him the kind of woman he needs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. She was instructing him in a righteous way,
Right.
I mean, a virtuous woman is a high moral standard. That's
Yeah.
what she's saying to him. You know, you need to look for someone. Now, here's a point I thought of. He's to look for her, that type. Or would she, that type of a woman, want someone other than a high moral standard in a man? So,
What do you
what
think,
about,
husband?
you know, how is he looked, you know, how what is he doing to maintain himself to look for this woman, hopefully,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, that just hit me like, yes, you do want this type of woman. You want someone with morals, with standards.
Mm-hmm.
How about that? Standards, you know? Today we don't see much of that, you know,
Yeah.
but unfortunately. But anyway, I'm just thinking, well, that type of a woman then is going to look for that type of a man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's what the first what 9 or 10 verses tell him. This is the kind of woman you need to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's, you know, you need to be that kind of man so that this
You
kind of
can
woman will be interested.
Wow.
Jill?
attract it. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Solomon. And
Mm.
he wrote also the book of Ecclesiastes, where he told what his own experiences were. And he was one who would go out and try it out and see how it worked.
Right.
And this is kind of the opposite kind of point of view. You know, don't go out there and just be determined in your mind. What is it you're looking for? What kind of a person is worthy of being the king's wife?
Right.
You know,
You know,
Solomon didn't recommend the life that he did in Ecclesiastes. He just told us, I did it all.
Yeah.
That's not what you want to do. You want to seek the Lord.
Yeah.
That's right.
Judy?
Yeah. Well, you hear, I don't know about today so much, but I know in my day, you would hear a man's got to sow his wild oats, a young man. He's got to sow his wild oats, you know? And no, he doesn't.
No.
You know, and that's what she's saying to him.
That's
Okay.
right.
This is what you need to do. You need to stay away, especially if he's the king or soon to be the king. You've got a high responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a Christian young man, you have a high responsibility.
Absolutely.
When
That's
you
right.
have a king that you answer to.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And to me, this is a piece that's useful for both men and women. You know, how do I look and see what my fruits are? We hear a lot about, you know someone by their fruits, but
Right.
this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
She's industrious. She's thoughtful. She's helpful. She's always does her husband good, not evil, all the days of her life. That's my favorite part, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's doing what we're told in the New Testament. She's walking circumspectly. She's considering all of her actions as she goes and what the consequences will be. And that's pretty much what King Lemuel's mother's trying to help him with.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. I like the verse 20 when you see how she will be a good helper for him. In verse 20, it says, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. Just as his mother told him earlier, you need to open your mouth for the mute and for the destitute and to help those who are poor and needy. And she says, you need to find a wife that's going to do that too. So that you are, as we say, on the same page, so that you're not trying to, to help others and she's trying to hurt them. You can help one another. And there's so many ways that wives help their husbands to be more godly, to be pleasing to God. And we can encourage the efforts that they're making and support them. Just like this godly woman would have done.
Yeah.
Right, right. By him making a wise choice in choosing his wife, he's really helping himself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's
Good
right.
point. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Anything else that came to you, Dana, as you were reading over
I'm
it?
just kind of going along with the last thought y'all were talking about. You know, one of the points you had made out in our notes was, you know, how can we be a help to
Mm,
our husbands secularly and spiritually? And I mean, there are so many ways, but you know, Jill made the point, be circumspect in our living, you know, take thought about what we do and how I appear and what I look like. And, you know, in these verses in Proverbs 31, it talks about that she cares what she looks like. She takes thought about her own clothing, not only the clothing of her family, but even her own clothing. And and that shows some self-respect. And if I don't have self-respect, how does that reflect on my family
yeah.
and even on my husband? And then I think about an elder. If one of the qualifications for an elder is that his wife, I mean, that he practices hospitality. Well, who's that going to fall on?
Right.
More or less. I mean,
Yes.
my
Yes.
husband helps a great deal when we entertain, but let's face it, it's not going to get done if I'm not helping with it. And you know, in our home, you know, the house is my world. The outside he can take care of, but this is my world. And there's some phrase he uses in Spanish, but it's, you know, that I'm the queen of the castle, and
Yeah.
it's my
Your domain.
my domain. And I think that that helps him. And you know, our realm is the spiritual because he's a preacher, but that helps him in all of those things. And then I think of, you know, Priscilla, and what did she do? What do we know about Priscilla? That she helped her, you know, she was a co-worker with her husband,
Mhm.
and they taught, not
Hey.
not Aquila, but Priscilla and Aquila taught Apollos. We can help in those things, but that means I have to be the woman who does these things and thinks about my husband, and but you know, more than my husband, my home. I mean, my Tall and I, we're not Dana or Tall, it's Tall and Dana.
Mhm.
I think that's the way a marriage should be. I think that's what the Bible teaches, that we are a team and we need to function like that. And so of course, if I'm what I should be as a wife, then I'm going to function as a partner to my husband. And I don't feel like a woman is inferior to her husband in any way, but I very much think I'm a partner with him, and I can make him or I can break him.
And he needs to be the man he needs to be.
Exactly.
There's instruction for him as well. Yes.
It's a partnership.
Yes, exactly. You know what, I'm everything that's been said, of course, I agree with everything. But I'm thinking about some young Christian women now. I'm just thinking about them, you know, maybe they're listening in, hopefully. And I can remember being a young, and I'm still learning, you know, but you learn, like, all of this does not come the minute you're baptized into Christ.
Right.
You know? It's really lifelong. It really is. How I should be as a wife, what he should be as how do we work together? How, you know, our children, how do we, it's a process. It is a process. So if there are any young ones out there who are thinking, oh no, this is too much for me. It's not. It's not, because the important thing is that you have obeyed the Lord, hopefully, and you're his, and you want to do the right thing by him.
You
Dana.
know, one of the things that has always been a sticker about this chapter is no woman can be that. And I agree. There is no perfect woman. And this can be an overwhelming chapter if you think, you know, I am not a morning person. And so to get up before dark
Right,
is not happening. I need 9 hours in bed.
Me too.
And I remember as a young woman, Judy, thinking, I will never be that.
Yeah.
I can never be the woman I'm supposed to be. I don't think that's the point. As Jill said, it's about being industrious. It's about thinking, being circumspect. And I think that's this is not about a specific woman. This is about a principle
Yes.
that we need to live and we need to strive for, and it's going to take a lifetime to get there. And we'll never be perfect. We'll never.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Food
Excellent.
for thought. I've got a note. I don't know when I wrote it about verse 10 that says wisdom personified.
Yeah.
And you can take a more abstract look at this and still get a lot of good personal advice out of this chapter.
Right.
Looking at it this way, I also think about the church as the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of ways some of this wisdom can be applied in our lives, even if we're not a married woman.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Or a mother giving advice to her son.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate so much y'all being on the program, and I hope that our viewers and listeners will get a lot of good from this discussion as much as I have. I've just really enjoyed, listening with you all, and just such a joy to be with you. And I thank you so much for being on the program tonight. Next week, our program is going to be in continuing our theme, our monthly theme of our joy. And next month, we're going to talk about compassion and how that can be a joy to us in being compassionate as God wants us to be. So we hope that you'll tune in next week on Thursday night at 8 o'clock for the next Older Women Likewise. And in the meantime, we encourage you to watch Answering Religious Error on Tuesdays at noon, Bible Questions and Answers on Wednesday at noon. And of course, they're also archived. You can watch them at your own discretion. Every day, there is a Daily Answer podcast that Cindy's husband, Mark, does. And he calls it the Daily Answer. And it's got really good information every day for us. So we encourage all of our viewers and listeners to watch those. And Dana, you have talked about that book. Now you're going to have to bring us a program on that book. So
Watch plenty.
yeah, because I've seen it and we've gone, so I didn't want to order it and come in when I wasn't going to be here.
Yeah.
But that's my next step, is to order that book. So I love the way that you write, and I know our viewers will want to know more about this book that you've written. And the name of it is
Stirring Silent Generations.
Stirring
I like
Silent
that.
Generations. That sounds really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jill and Judy, for being on the program, and such a joy to be together again. So good night. We'll see you
Good
next
night. Thank you, Ila.
time.